I want you to do something right now. If you're not driving, just take a second. Reach around to the back of your neck, or maybe check the side seam of the shirt or the jacket you're wearing right now.
Yeah, find that little tag.
Exactly. Find the tag. Because chances are it probably says made in China or maybe another common manufacturing hub, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's something we see every single day.
Right. To the point where it's essentially invisible to us. You see made in China, and you just, you accept it as a totally legal standard declaration of origin.
Right, you just assume it is what it says it is.
Yeah. But what if I told you that label, while technically legally accurate according to paperwork filed at customs, might actually be entirely fundamentally deceptive?
It is, honestly, arguably the ultimate sleight of hand in global retail today.
It really is.
We completely rely on those labels to tell us the definitive story of a garment's origin. But they often act more like a locked door.
A locked door deliberately obscuring a much darker reality.
Exactly. A highly lucrative reality operating just completely out of sight.
And today, we are going to pick the lock on that door. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We've spent the last few weeks just poring over a massive stack of investigative materials for this one.
Oh, it is a mountain of data.
It really is. We're looking at the exhaustive tightening belts report from the Leiden Asia Center, official UN Security Council, and OFAC advisories.
Plus that really incredible deep cover intelligence from Daily NK.
Right, and academic papers from the University of Sussex, supply chain analyses from The Guardian, Reuters, and they all point to one incredibly complex shadow supply chain.
Operating right across the China-North Korea border.
Yes. And our mission today is really to bridge that massive gap between shiny corporate social responsibility policies, CSR, and the actual gritty reality of international trade.
Because the sheer volume of data we have, ranging from satellite imagery to scraped customs manifests and corporate records, it reveals a system that is just highly adaptable,
Deeply entrenched.
and staggeringly profitable.
Now, before we pull on the first thread of this data, I do want to make a really quick note for you listening. Some of the intelligence and reporting we're drawing from deals directly with state actors.
Right. Specifically the Chinese Communist Party and the Workers' Party of Korea.
Yeah. And naturally, some of the source material uses some pretty politically charged language. So we just want to be completely transparent with you that in this deep dive, we are impartially reporting the facts.
Just the facts, the data, and the mechanical claims presented in these investigations.
Exactly. We aren't taking any political sides here.
No.
Nor are we, endorsing specific rhetoric from either the right or the left. We're simply here as investigators aiming to uncover the physical and economic mechanics contained in the original source material.
Because our focus really has to remain strictly on the mechanics of the trade.
Right.
The underlying economics driving it and the paper trail that exposes it. If we get bogged down in the political rhetoric, we honestly miss the actual operational genius of it all.
However illicit that genius may be.
Right. Exactly. We miss how these supply chains actually function.
So let's jump right into that operational side, starting with the physical geography. Because, you really can't understand the loophole without understanding the map.
Geography is everything here.
It really is. So we're looking heavily at Dandong. It's situated right on the banks of the Yalu River. And then Sino-Korean, the North Korean city, directly across the water.
Connected by the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge.
Right. Now, the baseline assumption is that this bridge is heavily monitored. But the data shows massive volumes of goods moving back and forth under a system called export processing.
Yeah, export processing.
Okay, let's unpack this. I understand the basic concept, like sending raw materials over and getting finished goods back. But mechanically, how does a Chinese trading company justify this to customs?
So the whole mechanism hinges on a very specific interpretation of customs law.
Okay.
Specifically rules surrounding outward processing and what they call substantial transformation.
Substantial transformation.
Right. So imagine a Chinese trading company in Dandong receives a massive order from a European or an American brand, say for 100,000 winter parkas.
Okay, that's a huge order.
Massive.
Yeah.
So the Chinese company sources the synthetic fabric, the zippers, the thread, the buttons, all of it.
Right.
They load these raw materials onto trucks and declare them at customs, not as final exports, but as materials for outward processing.
Wait, hold on. Let me just get this straight.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a customs official in Dandong, And I literally see trucks full of raw materials going into North Korea.
Yeah.
And then, a few weeks later, trucks full of fully assembled parkas coming back from North Korea.
Exactly what happens.
How on earth is it legal to then slap a Made in China tag on those coats?
Yeah.
Doesn't the system, instantly flag that the actual manufacturing happened in a sanctioned country?
Well, that is the exact loophole they exploit.
Really?
Yeah. According to the rules of origin that these trading companies use, the final origin of a product is determined by where the last substantial transformation occurred. So when those fully sewn coats come back across the bridge to Dandong, they aren't totally finished.
Okay, so what do they do to them?
The Chinese factory might just do the final quality assurance check. They iron the garments, attach the brand's hang tags, package them into retail-ready boxes, and then sew in that final Made in China label.
So just because they ironed it and put it in a cardboard box, they argue that is the final substantial transformation.
Legally, yes, that's the argument.
That's incredible. I mean, it's like a culinary ghost kitchen.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, like you pull out your phone, you order an expensive meal from a highly rated restaurant on some delivery app,
Right.
and it arrives in beautiful packaging with the restaurant's logo. But the food was actually cooked in an unmarked, windowless warehouse on the edge of town by totally different staff.
Yeah, completely disconnected from the storefront.
Exactly. You have no idea where your food really came from, even though the receipt looks perfectly legitimate. So international brands are ordering from the Dandong restaurant, essentially.
While all the heavy lifting is happening in the Sinuiju ghost kitchen.
Wow. The Dandong facility is basically just a transaction front.
That's all it is. It handles the international wiring of funds, the communication with the Western brands, and the final logistical packaging. The actual labor-intensive assembly is completely outsourced to the shadow facility.
But help me understand the sheer financial incentive here. Taking trucks full of fabric across an international border, dealing with border guards, paying transport fees, bringing it all back.
It sounds exhausting, right?
It sounds like a logistical nightmare. The profit margins must be astronomical to justify that kind of headache.
Oh, the economics are absolutely ruthless, and the margins are indeed massive.
Really? How massive?
Well, the Light in Asia Center and Reuters data break this down so clearly. Utilizing North Korean labor, whether through this cross-border export processing or by using North Korean laborers hidden inside the Dandong factories themselves, it's up to 75% cheaper for Chinese manufacturers.
Wait, 75% cheaper than hiring local Chinese labor?
Yes, 75%.
That is, if a brand is paying a set wholesale price per jacket, slicing your labor costs by 75% completely alters the financial trajectory of a factory.
It's transformative wealth for these factory owners.
I bet.
You have to remember, the Chinese garment industry underwent a massive boom for decades, but domestic labor costs have steadily risen.
Because Chinese workers rightfully demand better wages and better conditions.
Exactly. So to maintain the hyper-competitive pricing demanded by fast fashion and global retail, these factory owners looked across the river.
Because they needed a cheaper workforce to meet the brand's margins.
Right. And furthermore, businessmen interviewed in these reports claim that North Korean workers operating under intense state supervision actually produce up to 30% more output per day than an average Chinese worker.
Cheaper labor producing 30% more output. From a purely cynical, spreadsheet-driven perspective, that is the holy grail for a manufacturer.
It absolutely is.
But what about the international law aspect of all this? Because I'm looking at the University of Sussex paper by Kevin Gray and Jong-Woon Lee.
Yeah, excellent paper.
And they point out that UN Resolution 2375, which was passed back in 2017, explicitly banned all North Korean textile exports.
The total ban, yes.
You'd think a global ban enforced by the United Nations would cause major shipping lines and corporate compliance departments to freeze these supply chains instantly.
Yeah.
How did this trade survive that kind of regulatory drop?
You would definitely assume a global ban acts as a hard stop. But the Sussex paper illustrates that the supply chain didn't disappear. It's simply submerged.
Submerged, like it just went underground.
Exactly. It moved from the formal visible ledger to the informal clandestine network, because the desire to evade sanctions is inextricably linked to that 75% cost reduction.
The money's just too good.
Right. The structural demand from the West for cheap garments didn't disappear in 2017. Therefore, the incentive for the Chinese middlemen to supply them didn't disappear either.
So they just changed how they hid it.
Yes. They simply shifted their methodologies to rely on smuggling, altered customs codes, and complex corporate nesting to hide the origin of the goods.
Okay, let's talk about that corporate nesting, because that brings this abstract macroeconomic theory right into our closet.
It really does.
We aren't just talking about unbranded generic T-shirts sold at some local night market. We are talking about major household name international brands here.
Oh, absolutely. The biggest names.
Right. And OFAC actually issued an advisory detailing the specific deceptive practices these networks use. What are the mechanical strategies they employ to keep the Western brands completely in the dark?
So OFAC identified a few primary mechanisms of deception. The most prevalent one is unauthorized, multi-tier subcontracting.
How does that work in practice?
Well, a European apparel brand will audit and sign a contract with a legitimate, visually compliant factory in China.
Okay, so a totally normal, above-board business deal.
Right. That Chinese factory, acting as the primary node, then subcontracts the actual intensive assembly work to a North Korean firm without ever notifying the buyer. Wow.
So the brand's procurement software only ever sees the primary Chinese node.
It's a literal firewall of plausible deniability for the brand.
Exactly that, a firewall. Another method is the establishment of complex joint ventures.
Okay.
North Korean state-linked firms set up these really opaque partnerships with Chinese holding companies. They obscure the origin of the capital and the labor through layers of shell companies.
So when a compliance officer checks the corporate registry, what do they see?
They just see a domestic Chinese entity, completely unaware that the operational workforce is imported or outsourced across the Yalu River.
Man, the Leiden Asia Center report actually managed to pierce some of those corporate shells using a Chinese corporate database called Kichacha.
Yes, that was a brilliant piece of investigative work.
They tracked a specific network, the Deng Fixang network. And this part of the report is fascinating because it actually names names. Who is Deng Fixang, and how does this specific network operate within the supply chain? So, Deng Fixang is identified in the corporate records as an executive holding key positions across multiple textile factories in the Dandong region.
Sure.
And the researchers isolated two critical factories under this umbrella, Dandong SLT and Dragon STD.
And what makes these specific facilities so crucial to their investigation?
Their physical location. They are situated in areas like the Qianyang Economic Zone.
And what is the significance of the Canyon Economic Zone?
Well, according to Chinese government records and local reporting, that specific zone is heavily populated by imported North Korean labor.
Oh, I see.
We are talking about thousands of North Korean workers residing in isolated dormitories within these industrial parks.
And what's the explosive part of the Leiden findings here?
The direct connection to Western retail. Dandong SLT was explicitly listed as an approved supplier on a transparency report published by Adidas.
Wait, really? Adidas published that themselves?
Yes, and video footage and regional news reports also cross-referenced this network as supplying Skechers and Ralph Lauren.
That is wild. The brands are actively publishing these transparency reports to prove how ethical they are, and in doing so, they are publicly listing factories operating in zones notorious for shadow labor.
It highlights a massive, massive blind spot in their compliance.
It really does.
Yeah.
But how much volume are we actually talking about here? I mean, is this like a few rogue shipments a year that slip through, or is it systemic?
It is entirely systemic. To prove the volume, the researchers utilized Panjiva.
Panjiva, right. That's the global trade data platform.
Exactly. It scrapes and aggregates bills of lading and shipping manifests. And the Panjiva data for Dandong SLT showed them exporting $35 million worth of goods to the U.S.,
35 million?
$23 million to Germany, and millions more to the U.K. and Japan. And Dragon STD logged $14 million to the U.S. alone.
So this isn't just a small side hustle.
No, this is a multi-million-dollar artery feeding global retail, operating entirely under the radar of brand compliance.
The Panjiva data on another company they investigated, Xinjiang, is what really solidified the whole ghost kitchen concept for me.
Oh, the timeline on that one is just incredible.
The timeline of their shipping manifests reads like a perfectly executed laundering operation.
Can you break down the mechanics of the Xinjiang shipments? How did the researchers use customs codes to track the garments?
So the researchers focused on a specific harmonized system code, or HS code.
Okay.
In this case, HS code 6201.13, which universally categorizes woolen coats or shirts.
Got it.
By filtering Panjiva data for this specific code and this specific company, they uncovered a glaring temporal pattern. In August of 2013, the manifest shows Xinjiang importing a massive bulk shipment of these woolen coats from North Korea into China.
Okay, so the coats arrive from the Sinuriju Ghost Kitchen in August. What happens next?
Barely 4 weeks later, in September, the data shows Xinjiang exporting a practically identical shipment utilizing the exact same HS code 6201.13 for woolen coats out of China bound for the Netherlands. Let me push back on that for a second, though. If I'm a lawyer for Xinjiang, I'd argue, look, we're a massive trading hub. We import coats, we export coats. It's just a coincidence.
Right, that would be the standard defense.
How do the researchers prove it's the exact same batch of coats being laundered through the system?
The smoking gun is in the valuation.
The valuation.
Yeah. The researchers analyzed the declared value of the goods when they were imported from North Korea, and then they compared it to the declared value when they were exported to the Netherlands a month later.
And what do they find?
The difference in value was consistently around 10%.
Oh, wow.
And that 10% markup aligns perfectly with the standard facilitation fee, the profit margin that Chinese middlemen extract for running this export processing scheme.
So it's not a coincidence at all.
Not at all. It's a documented, recurring business model. The data showed this exact cycle repeating in 2015 and 2016, laundering the origin of the coats and shipping them to Germany and the Netherlands.
Which brings us to the inevitable collision between this paperwork deception and actual law enforcement.
Right.
Because I want to look at the Poof Apparel case from December 2020. Because this is the moment where the hypothetical supply chain hits a literal brick wall at a U.S. port.
The Poof Apparel incident is a masterclass in how customs enforcement can basically weaponize documentation.
Let's get into it.
So Poof Apparel, which is a U.S.-based retailer, attempted to import 2 massive shipping containers of women's and girls' clothing from China.
Okay.
And the bills of lading stated the manufacturer was Dandong Huaying Textiles and Garments.
A facility sitting right in the epicenter of the Dandong Shadow Network.
Precisely. Now, the intelligence units within U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, actively monitor these high-risk regions. So when those containers hit the port of Newark, CBP flagged them immediately.
Now, what is CBP?
They issued what's called a withhold release order, or a WRO, based on reasonable suspicion that the garments were manufactured using North Korean forced labor.
So the containers are just seized on the docks. I imagine Poof Apparel's legal team immediately fired back, right? They must have produced their contracts, the made-in-China tags, the commercial invoices, arguing they bought these legally from a Chinese entity.
Oh, they absolutely did. They relied on the standard defense. Our paperwork says China, our contract is with a Chinese company.
Right. Standard corporate response.
But CBP did something interesting. They shifted the legal burden of proof entirely onto the importer. CBP stated that to lift the WRO and release the goods, Poof Apparel had to provide granular, irrefutable documentation proving exactly how the Dandong Huayang employees were recruited and compensated.
Wow. What kind of documentation does that actually require?
CBP demanded to see the original government-issued identification cards of the specific workers on the assembly line.
Okay.
They demanded the daily time cards showing hours worked. They demanded the original payroll ledgers and concrete proof of financial transfer like bank statements showing that the specific individuals who stitched those garments received their full wages directly.
Which is an impossible standard to meet if your supplier is secretly running a segregated shadow workforce of North Koreans.
Exactly.
You can't provide bank statements for workers whose wages are being seized by a foreign state.
And that is exactly why the WRO held. Poof Apparel couldn't produce the documents because the documents didn't exist in a legitimate format.
Right.
The seizure at Newark proved that the standard commercial paperwork, the invoice, and the tag is entirely insufficient when you are dealing with state-sponsored supply chain obfuscation.
This raises a massive, glaring question about the entire industry of corporate social responsibility.
It really exposes the flaws.
Because these major Western brands spend millions of dollars a year on CSR initiatives. They hire independent third-party auditors to inspect their factories.
Right, they do.
So if I'm an auditor for a European brand and I physically walk into a facility in Dandong to conduct a scheduled inspection, how do I miss a shadow workforce of potentially hundreds of North Korean laborers? How does this multi-million-dollar deception survive a physical walkthrough?
What's fascinating here is that the failure of the CSR audit in these environments is basically mechanical.
Mechanical? How so?
The business of social compliance auditing is largely based on scheduled, localized inspections.
Okay.
So when the auditor arrives in Dandong, they are inspecting the specific primary facility listed on the contract. They walk the floor, they check that the fire extinguishers are pressurized, They review the payroll software. They ensure the lighting is adequate for the Chinese workers they see.
But they don't see the trucks leaving the loading dock at midnight headed for the Sino-Korean Bridge.
No, because the jurisdiction of the audit ends at the factory gate. The auditor has no mandate and honestly no ability to track the raw materials crossing an international border into North Korea.
Wow.
But even more insidious is how the factories handle the North Korean workers who are physically present inside the Chinese facilities.
Right, because the Light report noted thousands of them living in Dandong. If an auditor is walking the floor, you can't just hide 500 people in a broom closet. How do they segregate a massive industrial complex like that?
Well, you have to remember these are sprawling, multi-building industrial parks. The investigations revealed that facility managers possess highly sophisticated early warning systems.
Because audits are almost always scheduled in advance.
Exactly. Or at least they operate within a known window, so the factory has time to prepare. The North Korean workers are often physically segregated into entirely different wings of the complex or different buildings altogether that are simply omitted from the auditor's floor plan.
Oh, that's incredibly deceitful. And what if an auditor does spot them? What if they walk into the wrong room and demand to see the identification of the workers on the line?
The preparation extends to the paperwork as well. The reports detail that these North Korean workers are systematically equipped with forged Chinese identity documents. Yes. And these aren't crude fakes. They're often highly convincing, sometimes procured with the blind eye assistance of local brokers who understand exactly what the auditors are looking for.
There was a quote in the prompt material from a fashion platform executive about this exact tactic.
Right.
He told researchers, identity documents are compulsory in China. It is very effective, unless the documents have been forged.
That quote hits the nail on the head. The entire audit system relies on the assumption that the documents presented are authentic.
Right.
We know from extensive defector testimony that North Korean workers have their actual passports confiscated by state minders the absolute moment they cross the border into China.
So they have no personal identification of their own at all.
None. So the auditor walks the line, asks to see an ID, is handed a high-quality forged Chinese identification card, checks the box on their compliance tablet, and walks away.
And the brand gets their ethical certification.
Yep. The factory maintains its 75% profit margin.
And the consumer buys a guilt-free coat. It is a total systemic failure of visibility.
Complete failure.
So these factories are clearing millions in pure profit through these loopholes. But that massive profit margin isn't just coming from clever paperwork and forged IDs.
No, not at all.
It's coming out of the literal, physical stamina of the workforce. We really need to look at the reality of the people actually sitting at those sewing machines.
The human element is where the abstraction of supply chain economics becomes a really visceral reality.
I think nothing exposes the grim irony of this system more effectively than the PPE scandal investigated by The Guardian.
Oh, that was a huge expose.
Think back to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. The entire world was in a desperate, panic-driven scramble for personal protective equipment, masks, medical gowns, hazmat overalls.
Global governments, including the US and the UK, were throwing billions of dollars at emergency procurement contracts.
Right, essentially bypassing standard compliance checks just to get material into hospitals.
Exactly. And The Guardian launched a massive 3-month investigation to track where a huge portion of that PPE was actually originating.
And what did that investigation uncover?
They found profound, irrefutable evidence that Chinese factories in Dandong were utilizing hidden North Korean forced labor to mass produce this PPE.
Oh, yeah.
And those garments were then exported and utilized in hospitals in the US, the UK, Italy, Germany, South Africa, and Japan.
So democratic nations utilizing taxpayer funds to save lives during a global health crisis were inadvertently injecting capital directly into a supply chain heavily reliant on state-sponsored forced labor.
That is exactly what happened.
Let's talk about the specific conditions of that labor. Because the investigations make it clear we aren't talking about a tough, underpaid 9-to-5 job here.
Not even close.
The physical toll is staggering.
It is. The vast majority of these workers are young women. And the reporting details grueling, unrelenting schedules, routinely 12 to 18-hour workdays.
18 hours.
Yeah. Sitting hunched over an industrial sewing machine for 18 hours requires a level of physical endurance that is hard to even comprehend.
And the Reuters report highlighted a detail that genuinely shocked me. It wasn't just the sheer length of the shift. It was the microscopic level of control exerted over their basic bodily
Oh,
functions.
right, the restrictions.
The report noted that workers are severely restricted from taking toilet breaks, simply because the floor managers calculate that any time away from the machine degrades the efficiency of the assembly line.
It is the complete commodification of the human body. A manager at one of these facilities was quoted directly by a reporter stating, "The workers have no days off. They are not allowed to go out. The North Korean state controls them. They make money for the country."
Let's break down the financial reality of that quote, "They make money for the country." Because if you're listening to this, you might assume this is a standard sweatshop model, right? The factory owner pays a brutally low wage, but the worker eventually pockets the cash.
Right.
But this is state-sponsored labor. How does the actual financial transfer work? Does the worker ever see a paycheck?
The worker rarely sees the majority of the value they produce. The Chinese facility doesn't hand a paycheck to the individual woman at the sewing machine.
So who do they pay?
The facility pays the North Korean state-affiliated trading company or the assigned state management team directly. And from that bulk payment, the North Korean state seizes up to 70% of the wages immediately.
70% seized right off the top.
Yes. It is essentially an institutionalized skimming operation. This systemic wage seizure is one of the primary mechanisms Pyongyang utilizes to generate hard foreign currency.
Wow.
It is so critical to the regime's survival that the United Nations explicitly addressed it. UN Resolution 2397 states clearly that the revenue generated from North Korea's export of labor and textiles contributes directly to the funding of its weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs.
So mechanically speaking, when a consumer buys a jacket or a pair of sneakers routed through this specific network, fractions of a cent from that purchase are quietly siphoned off and funneled into a nuclear weapons program.
That is the exact macroeconomic reality the UN sanctions were designed to sever.
It's just staggering.
It is. But maintaining a workforce under these conditions, extracting 18 hours of labor a day, while confiscating 70% of their pay, it requires an apparatus of control that goes far beyond a typical factory floor manager.
Right, they can't just be regular bosses.
No, it requires an intense, constant matrix of psychological conditioning and surveillance.
There is a chilling quote from a businessman interviewed in the Reuters report that explains the underlying psychology.
Oh, I know the one.
He said, "They aren't like Chinese factory workers who just work for the money. They believe they're working for their country, for their leader."
The ideological conditioning is foundational here. The state frames this overseas labor not as a job, but as a vital patriotic duty, a sacrifice for the survival of the nation.
But the state doesn't rely on ideology alone, do they?
Oh no. They enforce it with a brutal surveillance architecture. As we mentioned, passports are confiscated the moment they cross the border. The workers are placed into isolated, heavily guarded dormitories.
Which are often located directly on the factory compound.
Yes. So their physical geography is entirely restricted.
What happens when the shift ends? Do they have any autonomy within those dormitories?
None at all. The end of the physical labor shift is often just the beginning of the ideological shift. The reports indicate they are subjected to mandatory political study sessions and mutual criticism sessions.
So they're replicating the exact social control mechanisms utilized inside North Korea.
Exactly. They are systematically isolated from the outside world, banned from possessing smartphones, banned from accessing the internet, and severely restricted from communicating with their families back home.
But they must have to leave the compound eventually, right? Like for basic necessities or supplies. How is that handled?
Well, on the rare occasions a group outing is permitted, perhaps to a local Dandong market, to buy personal items they are never allowed to go alone. They must travel in designated groups. And the most insidious element of the system is that within every single group, the state minders appoint a spy.
A spy.
Yes. This individual is mandated to report back on the behavior, the conversations, and the overall demeanor of their peers.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
It means you can never, ever let your guard down.
Never.
You can't vent to the woman in the bunk next to you about how exhausted you are or complain about your hands hurting because you have absolutely no idea if she is the designated informant.
It is a brilliantly cruel system designed to obliterate interpersonal trust. By ensuring that anyone could be an informant, the state ensures that everyone polices each other. Total compliance is achieved through this toxic mixture of physical exhaustion, profound isolation, and constant paranoia.
Man, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking the exact same thing I was when I read these reports. Why would anyone ever volunteer for this?
Right. It seems completely counterintuitive.
If the state seizes 70% of your paycheck, forces you to work 18-hour shifts without breaks, and spies on your every conversation, why do the sources indicate there is still heavy demand among North Korean citizens to get these overseas assignments? It seems entirely illogical.
It is deeply paradoxical until you understand the baseline economic desperation inside North Korea.
How desperate are we talking?
Well, Professor Remco Brucker, who is a key expert cited in the Leiden investigations, points out the grim reality. Even after the state seizes 70% of their wages, the remaining 30%, that tiny fraction paid in foreign currency, is still exponentially more valuable than anything they could possibly earn working in a domestic factory inside North Korea.
It's a devastating illusion of choice.
Exactly. They are choosing between the very real threat of extreme poverty and starvation at home versus enduring grueling, highly surveilled exploitation abroad, just for the chance to save a minuscule amount of hard currency to send back to their families.
But, as Brooker strictly clarifies, despite this desperate demand for the positions, it unequivocally meets the legal definition of forced labor.
Oh, 100%. These workers do not have the freedom to decline the work. They cannot quit and find another employer, and they have zero autonomy over their free time. They are captives of an economic vacuum deliberately engineered by their own government.
It is an incredibly sobering reality. And knowing this, knowing the UN has passed multiple resolutions, 2375, 2397, to target this exact system, you would think the pressure would eventually crush the network.
You would hope so.
But instead of collapsing, it's just shifting. If we think of this smuggling network like a hydraulic system, if you apply immense regulatory pressure to one valve, the capital doesn't just disappear. It blows out a different valve because the baseline demand hasn't changed. Let's look at how the geography of this trade is currently mutating.
The adaptability of the network is arguably its defining feature. And the daily NK report from July 2024 provides a really fascinating real-time analysis of how this mutation is unfolding right now. Let's look back at the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge, the traditional overland artery between Dandong and Sinuiju.
Okay.
What is the current economic reality for traders utilizing that bridge?
Well, according to the intelligence, the cost of doing business on the bridge is skyrocketing. The daily NK sources explicitly state that logistics costs have doubled since the outbreak of COVID-19.
Doubled.
Yeah. Traders are currently paying around RMB 40, which translates to roughly $5.50 US per kilogram, just to cover the logistics and facilitation fees of moving goods back and forth.
$5.50 a kilogram might not sound like much until you scale it to industrial manufacturing.
Right.
If a Chinese middleman is moving a ton of raw textiles across the bridge, that equates to RMB 40,000 or about 500 US dollars per ton, entirely eaten up by logistics and bribes. The reporting notes that Chinese traders usually absorb about 60% of this cost, while the North Korean side takes 40%. But regardless of how it's split, it is severely degrading those 75% profit margins we discussed earlier.
But why the sudden price spike? Is it just global inflation or fuel costs?
No, the massive increase is directly tied to the squeeze of customs enforcement and international scrutiny. Because of the UN sanctions and the global spotlight on Dandong, Chinese customs officials operating the official land route are under immense bureaucratic pressure to strictly inspect shipments.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
Because the real friction occurs. Because the traders aren't just moving fabric. The baseline trade is garments, but the real fortunes are made moving highly sanctioned, highly lucrative commodities.
Exactly. What else are they slipping into these trucks?
Minerals, raw materials, high-end electronics, luxury goods. An official at a trading company in Sinuiju was remarkably candid with Daily NK, stating, "It's difficult to make money just by exporting processed goods, so we sometimes secretly mix in profitable items."
So they're attempting to hide sanctioned rare earth minerals or electronics underneath tons of synthetic winter coats.
Precisely. But because the Chinese border guards are now executing more rigorous inspections at the bridge, these mixed shipments are getting flagged.
What happens when they get caught?
When a trader is caught smuggling sanctioned minerals, they face catastrophic financial penalties, heavy duties, massive fines, or total confiscation of the shipment.
Ouch.
So the risk profile of the Friendship Bridge has simply become unsustainable for the high-margin goods.
Which brings us back to the hydraulic system analogy. The pressure at the bridge is too high, so where does the flow of capital go?
They bypass the bridge entirely.
Right.
They move to the water. Break down this pivot to the sea for us.
Okay.
Where is the new route?
The intelligence indicates a highly coordinated effort to shift the center of gravity away from the heavily scrutinized Dandong-Sinuiju corridor, moving northeast. They are actively institutionalizing a brand new, sea-based smuggling route connecting Jeongang County, located in North Korea's Chagang province, across the water to Linjiang City in China's Jilin province.
Why choose that specific geographical point?
The terrain and the history. Historically, the Zhenggang-Linjiang corridor has been utilized as a lower-level smuggling route for agricultural products and timber since the 1990s.
So it's a known path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The geography allows for shallow draft vessels and smaller, less conspicuous maritime transfers. Now, Chinese and North Korean state-affiliated traders are joining forces to upgrade this route, dredging channels and securing local political cover to move industrial-scale sanctioned goods.
It is a deliberate strategic maneuver to completely bypass the official, digitized customs checkpoints present at the Dandong Bridge.
Yes.
So mechanically, they load the sanctioned minerals or the processed garments onto ships in Jeongang, navigate across the water under the radar, and offload in Linjiang, completely avoiding the X-ray machines and border guards in Dandong. What is the projected economic impact of opening this maritime route?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the financial projections from the traders themselves are staggering. By shifting to the sea route, they anticipate cutting their overall logistics costs by a massive 50% compared to the overland bridge shipments.
A 50% reduction in overhead. That instantly repairs the profit margins that the COVID-19 delays and the strict customs inspections eroded away.
It restores the margins, but more critically, it solves the compliance problem. An unmonitored maritime route allows them to freely and secretly move the highest value sanctioned items.
It's basically a free pass.
Right. This isn't just a desperate attempt to keep the garment trade alive. It is a calculated expansion of the pipeline for restricted minerals and technology. The intelligence concludes that if this Wungan-Linjiang route becomes fully operational, it will result in a massive, unimpeded surge of foreign currency flowing directly into the coffers of the North Korean regime.
It is a profound testament to the resilience of a shadow economy. When an illicit system is backed by state actors and driven by massive, globalized profit margins, it doesn't just evaporate when a new resolution is signed in New York.
No, it adapts.
It alters its corporate structures, it forges new documents, it abandons bridges, and it takes to the sea.
It reinforces the harsh reality that international sanctions are only as formidable as their physical enforcement. And attempting to hermetically seal a border as geographically porous, historically complex, and economically interdependent as the Sino-Korean frontier is an almost insurmountable geopolitical challenge.
So bringing all of these complex threads together, the Panjiva data, the customs loopholes, the human toll, what is the ultimate picture we've uncovered? We started by looking at a simple, ubiquitous label on a piece of clothing, and we've mapped out a massive, self-sustaining loop of exploitation and evasion.
The entire system is basically a cyclical engine.
How so?
It is initiated by the relentless demand from Western brands and ultimately from us, the consumers, for fast, affordable fashion that still yields high corporate profit margins.
Right.
Chinese factories, squeezed by this demand and facing rising domestic labor costs, seek out the ultimate cost-cutting measure. They outsource the labor to the North Korean state, either via export processing across the Yalu River or by importing hitting workforces into their Dandong facilities.
And the North Korean state, systematically isolated from the global banking system and desperate for the hard currency required to fund its regime and its weapons programs, willingly supplies its own citizens as a captive, forced labor pool, systematically confiscating the lion's share of the wealth they generate.
Exactly. The international brands get their cheap inventory and clean CSR audits. The Chinese middlemen secure their 75% profit markup. The North Korean state secures its funding, and the young women at the sewing machines endure 18-hour days under a microscope of total surveillance and paranoia.
And whenever international watchdogs attempt to sever this engine with legal sanctions, the networks leverage decades of informal relationships and rugged geography to mutate, shifting their capital flows from highly scrutinized land and bridges to hidden maritime smuggling routes.
It is a sobering, incredibly complex reality operating right behind the fabric of our daily lives.
So the next time you are in a department store, or you tear open a package delivered to your door and you check that Made in China label on a winter coat, a pair of sneakers, or a set of scrubs, I want you to remember the invisible geography that label might be hiding.
The real story behind it.
Remember the trucks rumbling across the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge in the dead of night. Remember the shallow draft ships slipping across the water to Linjiang City to avoid customs. And remember the workers sitting at sewing machines for 18 hours a day, watched by a state minder, forbidden from even speaking their minds.
That tiny piece of fabric tells you where the garment was legally finalized for export, but it completely obscures the true, devastating human cost of its creation.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question. Something to really mull over long after you take your headphones off today. If our entire global system of affordable fashion, rapid shipping, and endless consumer choice is built on supply chains so impossibly complex, so deeply nested, that even the world's most powerful brands cannot or will not track them to their absolute origin, are we as consumers demanding a level of cheap convenience that fundamentally requires someone, somewhere, to remain completely invisible?
It's a question we all have to grapple with the next time we look at the price tag.